very much. Good afternoon. Thank you all for coming to join for this talk today. And I'm really greatly appreciative. I've said to you, many of you personally, but just as a group, that this honor you've given me of honorary doctorate is very meaningful. As some of you know, the topic of human-computer interaction is sort of a still emerging one, and it was certainly a challenge 35 years ago when I began to work on these topics. In 1980, published a strange book called Software Psychology that suggested this marriage of disciplines, and some people thought it was a strange marriage. And it's gone well, and its children have flourished in happy ways. And so today I want to tell you a little bit about my story about how I came to understand what it was about the emergence of this discipline and the professional user experience design field, that the twin births were a necessary and healthy structure to bring about the success of both. That if they were only one of those, it would have been much harder, but having both of them made it better. So I'm happy to represent, as always, the Human-Computer Interaction Lab at the University of Maryland, an interdisciplinary group that's this year. On May 24th, come join us. We'll have our 35th anniversary. We're now in our 7th director, so that's very satisfying to see. It's run by both Computer Science Department, which is my home base, and the College of Information Studies at the University of Maryland. I might give a plug. The Dean of the College of Information Studies is my wife, Jennifer Priest, who's speaking here tomorrow at 11 a.m. about citizen science. You may want to check and see that, and we appreciate again that you've invited both of us. But this group has many alliances on campus with all kinds of groups in psychology, journalism, education, and the wonderfully titled Maryland Institute for Technology and the Humanities. And the fact that we have these partnerships is part of the story. It's not just an idea of being interdisciplinary, but it's the idea that if you work on these diverse kind of problems, you actually get stronger research overall. So Frank already mentioned the book Designing the User Interface, now in 6th edition, which tells the story, and I'm pleased many people know me from that book. And that's kind of my calling card within this discipline. By now I needed 5 co-authors to help me tell the story of the remarkable growth of this field that in these 35 years has resulted in the fact that 7 or 8 billion people have something like this in their pockets, and they actually can use it. It didn't just happen by accident. It wasn't foreordained that that would be a success. But the work within this community led to a set of guidelines that led to successful designs that made it possible for young and old, men and women, illiterate even, or people with disabilities, all to succeed in using these tools. So a little bit just where I came from, the kind of problems. Frank already mentioned the idea of highlighted links. This is the page from Wikipedia about the University of Melbourne, and those highlighted links were something that we were developing in 1984, and they became part of Tim Berners-Lee's manifesto for the web in spring '89, and so we have a clear trajectory of where that went. As Frank was hinting, there were others who were working on various versions, but the visual representation of it came from what we were doing. Also, things like the touchscreen keyboards, those little keyboards on your pocket. We began working on this in 1988. Touch screens required 1-inch size buttons to get any kind of accuracy, and so that seemed to be a stumbling block, and we were determined to push a big keyboard to a smaller, down to a 3-inch one, which we tested with users and demonstrated it. And it worked by, when you put your finger on the screen, you got a cursor just above it, and you could slide it back and forth, and it would activate on liftoff. And not all of you may know of it, but on your Apple iPhone, it's still the liftoff technique. And Steve Jobs had visited our lab, so we know the trajectory. I was a consultant for 5 years to Apple, so those connections were there. And those tiny keyboard was was something actually the reviewers for the journal article did not believe we could do it. And it took a video, which you apparently saw, of me with a black beard demonstrating this thing. We've also, we're the source, and this is the patent on the idea of photo tagging, that you have a list of your family or colleagues, and you drag and drop them, they stick on the image, and then you can search. And that patent was become widely implemented in a variety of systems. So those are the kind of commercial things we did, but I'm also proud of the more technical visualization tools we've developed over the years. Spotfire is a commercial product, began from an academic paper in 1994. Student Christopher Ahlberg formed a company with a few friends in '97. I served on the board of directors for 5 years. It grew to 200 people and was acquired in 2007. It now continues as a privately held company and is a sort of major tool in the visualization community. And of course, there are many others, like Tableau is a tool widely used, more widely used. Its success is quite remarkable. There are dear friends who have run that, and it's a major company. And the whole field of visualization has grown up. My own efforts with tree maps. Here is a tree map from a company called FinViz. This shows the 11 sectors of the Standard & Poor 500, so healthcare, basic materials, services, technology, financial consumer goods. Each company is represented by a rectangle whose area is proportional to the market capitalization of that stock. So the biggest is Apple, but Google, Facebook, ExxonMobil, so on. And the color coding, this is a good day. You see it immediately with a glance once your eye and mind know what to look for. Green means it's up since yesterday. Bright green is up 3%, 2%, 1%. And there are still some sectors down, and you find the patterns that you come to understand. Utility sector is down on days when tech stocks and other high-flying stocks are up. And there's other basic materials sectors, which sometimes the gold goes against the banking stocks. There's a variety of those interesting patterns that become available. But there are thousands of implementations of tree maps for medical data, legal, and so on. We also worked on NodeXL, a free download, 500,000 downloads of that, to analyze social media networks, particularly Twitter networks. This is a sort of politically relevant one we did quite early in 2004, showing the polarization in the U.S. Senate voting. The red Republicans here, the blue Democrats over here. And there were 3 Republicans at that time who were ready to cross over and work with the Democrats, Spector, Collins, and Snow. Susan Collins is still that person who's the crossover if you follow U.S. politics. And many people have since made maps that are quite like this. And this is our current work over the last year's electronic medical records called Event Flow. If you have 1 million patient histories, and each one is thousands of events in a medical history, we'll let you look at it and find patterns. So those are the kind of things I like to work on, that they're for professionals working on real problems, and that's kind of the center of today's discussion, that I think our work was accelerated because we worked on real problems with people who had those problems. Not toy problems, synthetic data, or imagined problems, but getting out there, working with business and government, working with colleagues in other departments, not because they were interdisciplinary, but because they had good problems. And those colleagues in economics or journalism or biology or English literature drove our work forward because it challenged the visualization methods that we were developing. So the central thesis here is that working on real problems gets you better theories. Kind of interesting challenge, and alluded to the ABC, the applied and basic combined, which is the message of the book. So that's where we're going, and the book, was a result of many years of reflecting on this, and then took 3 or 4 years to bring these ideas into a coherent form that I could present it to you in an orderly way. So the ABCs, there's a few little bit of jokes. The subtitle is Achieving Breakthrough Collaborations, which is one part of it, but it's also applied and basic combined, which I'm going to, and there's other things such as always build connections and ask better questions, little bits of jokes about those things. Okay, so that's where we're going. So the story of the book is that we've come to a new way of thinking here. And we have to break free from the old ways of thinking. And the old ways go back to 1945 when Vannevar Bush, a great engineer, MIT, and became the science advisor to Franklin Roosevelt. And as the war was coming to an end, he wrote a quite interesting manifesto, which I encourage you to read, called Science, the Endless Frontier. And in it, he laid out the belief that working on basic foundational work first, and then seeking applications, going to market, and building products was the way forward. This became known as the linear model. And Vannevar Bush, some say, lied when he said this, because he said, inevitably, the basic research leads to applications. Now, it's true, occasionally it does, but inevitably, no. And people began to challenge this in the 70s, in the 80s, in the 90s. You may know the wonderfully written book, Pasteur's Quadrant, by Donald Stokes, which takes this on and produced a pretty powerful, pushback. And since then, others have done it. But somehow, those pushbacks did not stick. And the entrenched view of scientists who wanted their unfettered funding to do curiosity-driven research for as long as they wanted and whatever they wanted remained in place. Of course, who wouldn't? It's a very appealing and comfortable world. But that began to unravel because it wasn't working. And one of my colleagues, a dear friend, Dan Sarowitz, writes an essay called Saving Science. And his point was that Vannevar Bush's beautiful lie had corrupted scientific research, leading to fewer benefits from science, of lower outcomes from clinical trials, of irreproducible results, which is seen as a crisis in many circles in the U.S. And so the rising force of complaints grew. And in that context, I was determined not to just write a complaint, but a more forward-looking manifesto which said, here's what to do, here's how we might change, and here's why, and here's the evidence that it works. So this new age, this new possibilities, has three components. The first is the challenges of the 21st century are vastly different from what they were 70 or more years ago. And if you want to know what the challenges are, well, here's some places to begin. We have a broader discussion, and I encourage you to read these and send your students to read them, but the Bill and Melinda Gates Grand Challenges, maybe the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, 17 goals. The National Academy of Engineering has 14 Grand Challenges. These are well thought out, interesting areas. Now, they're large areas like, clean water or clean air, and no one researcher will do all of that, but you can do one piece of it. And getting our students to contribute as tile to the mosaic of the improving world is what this movement is all about, okay? So the challenges are different, and they're characterized by being socio-technical in nature, that all of these things, making progress is more than just a hypothesis-testing scientific experiment. They're social design constructions that we need to do. If you want to improve healthcare delivery or promote energy sustainability or environmental preservation, you need to engage in a larger social dimension. And that's difficult, and different kinds of research methods, which we'll talk about. Okay. The second major shift is that to face all these challenges, we actually do have some pretty potent tools. And the internet, the World Wide Web, and social media have changed the game dramatically, and the way researchers work has shifted enormously. 40 years ago, the average researcher read 175 papers a year, and they got these from the 4 to 8 journals that they subscribed to and got delivered by paper to their offices. And now that system has been replaced by an electronic version where the majority of sources of new papers are electronic email, listservs, blogs, YouTubes, all kinds of ways that people communicate these new ideas and papers. And the diversity of journals that people read is vastly different. So that's one change. The other is that the collaborative nature of the internet enables much more powerful teamwork in ways that weren't possible 30 or 40 years ago. And this is manifested in a dramatic change. 50 years ago, 50% of the papers were single-authored. 50% were 2 or more authors. Now, 90% are 2 or more authors. And the really interesting result is that if you believe in citation counts, and I hope to push that forward as one way of looking, not the only way, but you find that even 50 years ago, teamwork brought advantages and increased numbers of citations. But the advantage has doubled now, because people are better at collaborating, the tools are better, shared documents, shared data, Skype, email, and other ways, and people's fluency with collaboration tools has made greater opportunities. The third is I see the raised ambition of the students I see who really want to make a difference, change the world. Okay? And that's admirable. And I see that the papers contain much more potent evidence and methods than they did 30 or 40 years ago. So 30 or 40 years ago, a medical paper might have done a study at one university hospital with 800 patients. Now it's 800 patients, but replicated at 10 universities around the world in different contexts and validating the idea in much more potent ways. So that becomes possible because of these communication media. There's a downside, of course, because with these raised ambitions also comes raised expectations of the funders, of those who support research, and the community in general. What's acceptable for publication now is much more than before. Even just the mechanics. If you want to publish a paper in science, you can't just write a paper, but you need the supplemental materials, you need the backing up data, you need the full-on support that demonstrates that you've done this work and that others might, in part, replicate some of the data analysis because you've provided all this backing evidence. So I think that's, the number of pages in science has remained fairly constant, but the backing supplemental data has grown by orders of magnitude. So that's a big change. Okay, so here's where we are. And this was my thinking, and I began to clarify what the substantive differences were from 30 or 40 years ago, and the three I mentioned again: the immense problems, the new technologies, and then the raised ambition. So, and how to deal with it. And I wrestled with many different forms, and it led me to two central principles. I've already mentioned the first one: applied and basic combined, the argument that by combining applied and basic research, you get more rapid progress in both. Okay, so I'm asking for more. It's not a, we've passed the days of do you want to do applied or basic, you want to do applied and basic. And the argument again, the twin win comes from working on real problems, taking a theoretical approach, and the twin win is manifested by published papers with the theories and validated solutions ready for travel, okay, ready for dissemination. And that's what you're after, okay? So applied and basic was the first principle. And the second principle that I became aware of that sort of grew over time was the idea that science was not enough, okay? Thomas Kuhn's Structure of Scientific Revolutions in 1960 told us about science being research. But we've moved on to accept that engineering is research, okay? Imagine that, in the days before World War II, engineering is what train drivers did or other things, and engineering has become a full-fledged research method. And its methods are different from the scientific method of hypothesis. And they're, pilot testing, measurement, iterative design, modular design, and so on. But the new kid on the block, I thought, was design. And I was pleased to see the Melbourne School of Design, a beautiful building with lots going on. And that's very positive. And the places that began to have design, Rhode Island School of Design in the U.S., Stanford School of D School for Design, were examples that inspired me.
And as I looked around, I was looking for the evidence that this was a stronger phenomena than the few examples I knew. And I went to the Google Ngram viewer. It's kind of worth sort of you'll get absorbed for a few hours and looking at this data, but Google scanned 20 million books in English going back 400 years, and you can search them all at once and find out the relative frequency that a certain word appears. I said, let me do that for science, engineering, and design. And you find from 1900 to 2000, engineering becomes slightly more popular, science wiggles around, but design takes off, and in 1975 crosses over and becomes the dominant topic. I was pretty taken by this result, and a bit surprised. It was, 1975 sort of significant. It wasn't Steve Jobs and Johnny Ive who made it happen, but they were part of that movement that elevated design and design thinking to be a dominant force. But, one data point wasn't quite enough. I didn't feel like betting the book on that. And soon after, I got access to the New York Times Chronicle database, which is the database of all articles published in the New York Times. Ran similar search, and there we are again. Scientist, engineer, and designer, 1975 crosses over. So that was pretty interesting. Those figures both wound up in the book. And again, it's not perfect. You could challenge this in many ways, but it seems to me pretty interesting evidence that we should be teaching our students the methods of design. Now, engineers will sometimes say, oh yes, design is part of engineering. But the designers come back and stand up and says, no, actually, there's something really different about what design does than what engineering does. So you may be having those debates in your faculty as well, but I would say it's worth reading about the methods of design thinking, the ways of questioning the premises of the problem, questioning the requirements, questioning the outcomes, having a phase of divergent thinking, then converging, and then maybe again diverging and converging. The British Council of Design calls this the double diamond of design thinking. And others have made variations on it. Design is still an emerging field, but I came to value it and see that it was part of our thinking as well. That the things we did in building these visualization tools I showed you were not just scientific studies, not just a hypothesis test that we ran controlled experiments on, which we did, but there were also design iterations. And we began to shift our research methods from controlled experimental studies only to being supplemented by case studies. And one of my favorite dissertations of a student had 13 case studies, real data with real users outside our group who used our tools, and there's 13 such stories that typically are 4 to 8 weeks long of working with them. Now, case study is seen as a story, but it can be more. It's a way of collecting evidence in support of a thesis. And the thesis is that this visualization tool helps make discoveries happen. So that's what we were out to prove, and we collected evidence that way. And we found that case study methods were much more effective in our refining our tools and also understanding their strengths than controlled empirical studies. So that's the basic argument. So here's where we are now. We've got these 3 contextual issues, and we've got 2 guiding principles. Let me take a pause and kept the light on. So any questions or challenges about this so far? With me? A little shock there, huh? Anything? Yes, Liz, thank you.
Do you find cohorts either in the research sector or in some of the external communities who find this confronting or confrontational, or is it broadly accepted?
Sure. Yeah, I would say in my audiences, 10 or 15% are, very much opposed. We want to do our basic research. I hope your efforts fail. I've gotten sort of strong, heckler-type things who come up and, give me a talking to. About another 10 or 15% says, this is great,
this is what we're doing, I just didn't have the words for it, and you've given me a way to express what I'm doing. I would say in the middle are 60 or 70% who haven't ever quite thought about how they choose problems or how they do their work. They've been coasting along on what their mentors taught them, and there was not a self-conscious and reflective discussion with themselves about how they do research and why they do research. So, yeah, I would say we get, I'm getting these things, and I'll, at the end, talk a little bit about the ways I'm seeking to respond to them, and the coalescing now of groups of people who are trying to make this happen at a broader scale than just my running around. Ivan?
Yeah, just one question about the science, engineering, and design. I can see that there are three different concepts there. I often upset my colleagues by not making any distinction between science and engineering. And I would go as far as saying that it's the combination of the three that really makes the difference, rather than having maybe even design alone. I don't think that design by itself.
I agree. I hope you didn't get any sense. I mean, I'm here as a scientist, and I think scientific method's wonderful for some things, but sometimes it does not give you what you want. I'll have some examples. And then engineering is yet a different method. I mean, and so is design. You may remember my book is called Designing the User Interface, okay? I'm a member of the National Academy of Engineering, but I'm a computer scientist, so I've had some exposure to these different approaches and ways of thinking, and yes, they can be controversial, and I would say, if you don't understand the difference, then that's worthwhile for you to get into it. And I would say the main thing I'd love to see is that you teach your students these three methods and give them a chance to exercise their skills with all three methods. To design something, I think, is a great thrill. To make something new is really great fun. Engineering, to refine and improve and validate and measure and make at scale and modular, those are other skills. And scientific methods of hypothesis testing is yet a different form. Okay? So you want to have all those skills available. Okay, so the book proceeds. There are 5 chapters, and the first is about choosing actionable problems. Frank and I had discussions about how we teach our students to choose problems, and there's a whole discussion about that. There are the lists I gave you of the grand challenges, but there are more focused ways of choosing a problem, trying a problem out for size for a week or a month and deciding to go or not to go, and how to choose the right kind of problems. Academics are smart people, but often they don't choose the right problems. So the question is, how do you get them to the right problems? And the way that central to me is to work on actionable problems, working with a partner in business, government, or non-governmental organizations. That's the operational way to make this happen. Now, there's a fourth category. You may also work with problems on campus with colleagues in other disciplines or your own discipline. If somebody's got a problem, pay attention. That's where you have a chance. If you've got tools to help them with that problem, that's good news. Okay? So the problems are one. Then the methods have shifted also from the traditional scientific method of Darwin's observations and controlled experiments to the notions of intervention and the idea of doing things at scale. So in the computing field, this is called A/B testing, or one form of it called A/B testing. If Amazon wants to know if they'll sell more books with a bigger picture of the book or more text, they try it out. And they give 10,000 users one version and 10,000 users another version, and in a couple of weeks they will know which ones work. Microsoft runs about 200 of these on any given day, where they're testing all kinds of features. I see a hand in the back. I'll take that.
What would be the picture at the end if everyone is just seeking the research as no government or applied science? What is the picture of the end?
The picture is thriving theoretical developments.
But why we should come to the uni at the first place? Why we should not go to university opened by Google? Because at the end it offers a job. At least instead if you do good.
Fair. Because I'm not saying to shift to one side or the other. And that's, I often hear that. I'm saying do both. You want the academic theoretical approach, which has generalizable results, which industry doesn't always pursue. You want the published papers. and the rigor of writing about it, the documentation of the previous work and the inspirations and the recording of potential directions, the scientific paper remains a central idea. So Google's hybrid approach, you rightly say, if you can read the paper by Al Spector and Peter Norvig, a nice 4-page paper that describes their hybrid approach. And as I discussed with them, I had two criticisms. For one, they didn't publish a lot of papers. Okay? And they said, yes, and we're trying to change that. Because they, even on their side, they found that publication was actually a benefit to bringing ideas, to validating, to understanding, to gaining their credibility. And the other part was they had less of attention to design thinking in their early work, and that's also shifted. So industry does have a different ethic than university. They're both good. I think you want your students to have exposure to real problems, whether they're problems in industry or government or on your campus, and I want them to take to bring about a generalized solution. So, for example, Maryland has a very strong and large research center on transportation technology. Okay, they have about 60 people working on that, and we do a lot of work with them, and we wind up publishing papers in the transportation technology sector, but those problems give us advances in the computer science and information visualization. So I think being aware that there are these two domains and working on both gives you greater strength. Okay, so the methods are changing. The teamwork, and this is the largest chapter, and I think the generally most spirited one, people seem to enjoy it, and the shift to teamwork and the questions about how to form teams is an important one. The diversity within such teams is good, not necessarily interdisciplinarity. I'm not the biggest. There was a whole chapter on interdisciplinarity, and I threw it out. And it returned as a section in the chapter on teamwork. So I'm not opposed to interdisciplinarity. I'm in favor of working on real problems. Working on problems may bring you partnerships with people in different disciplines, especially the domain experts, but there may be, even within your own discipline, places where bringing other people together. Okay? Once you have a team, then managing it is a whole other challenge. There's whole books on that. Maybe a wonderful one to read is the free book from the National Academy of Sciences in the United States called Enhancing the Effectiveness of Team Science. It's their big bestseller for the last couple of years, nicely written, filled with good advice, and well documented. So, enhancing the effectiveness of team science. So teamwork's another problem, another interesting issue. And then the ways you validate by testing ideas, prototypes, and the realistic interventions. And then, interesting, this one produces pushback too, the need to tell your story, to promote your work, to promote the adoption of your work. Okay? My colleagues sometimes would say, my work speaks for itself. I don't need to go out and give talks, or, well, actually they're willing to do talks sometimes, but they don't want to talk to journalists, they don't want to do Twitter, they don't want to do Facebook, they don't want to do YouTube videos, and I think that's a mistake. So we've begun to shift the culture to try to make that happen. The evidence is pretty strong that if you do that kind of mild promotion, I would say 1 hour a month is what I'm asking you for. You take 1 hour and think about how you might produce a video or write a blog post or do a little of Twitter, and it has measurable effects. And you can take a look at the chapter and look at that. And actually, there's one particular example that people seem to like. It's a small 2-paragraph section called Send, 5, and Thrive. Send, 5, and Thrive. And it comes from a story. A wonderful PhD student was finishing a paper, and it was accepted for publication. We had 2 weeks to make the revision. And I just had this idea. I said, Megan, I want you to take the paper. We've got 63 references, and look through all the references and find the 5 most important people who have worked on the problem that we're working on. And I want you to get their emails and send them a personal note that says, you know, "Dear superstar professor, I'm a PhD student at University of Maryland working with Ben Shneiderman. He sends his regards. Our paper has been accepted for publication, and the revision is due in 2 weeks. We have 2 questions for you. 1, have we been fair in describing your contribution to this area? And 2, have you written anything more recently that we should be citing?" And I will bet you that you get 80% response within 48 hours from Harvard or Tsinghua or Oxford or wherever it might be, or University of Maryland, because that kind of a message will be very attractive to a leader, even a leader in the field who's plenty busy, because it speaks to them. It says, you know, they want to know if they've been fairly described. So Megan goes off, and she comes back a few hours later, and she says, "You know, I can't do this." I said, "Why not, Megan?" So I looked at the paper, and it says, "The work of superstar professor failed to do XYZ. This paper corrects this omission." I looked at it, and I sort of thought, that one's an easy one to fix, you know? We just changed the paper, and it now says, "The pioneering work of superstar professor can be productively extended by the methods in this paper." Okay? And it had an important message for me and for my students that says, you are a member of a scientific and research community, and you have to play nice. You know, it does not make you look good to criticize leaders of the field. You're not showing off how clever you are by putting down the work of others. Join the community, show you're a good citizen, and show your willingness to mention in a positive way those who have preceded you. So there were a lot of lessons as my mindset began to shift towards this idea of collaborations at various scales and teamwork, networking, and so on. So that was one of the stories there. We can come back to it. But you know, this is the final outcome here, the twin win, that you get solutions to meaningful problems that people care about, and you get theories that are generalizable, that can be transferable to other places, and you get published papers. I'm a great believer in published papers. My complaint against a lot of the design thinking people is they say my object is my theory. And no, it's not. I mean, I want to know what your theory is. I want you to write about it. I want you to document and cite the work that preceded you. I want you to think about where this goes from here. Be part of a community and speak up with the written form. Okay? And, by the way, do videos and so on. Another sort of small idea before I sort of pull this together with some evidence is one of the things that worked out nicely at the University of Maryland. 3 years ago, I went to our vice president of research, and I suggested to him that we have a Research Communicators Award, and that faculty who write about their research for general audiences would get some recognition. And I thought this was good. In a few weeks, they sent out a notice. 6 weeks later, we had 18 nominations, and 6 weeks after that, we had a nice luncheon, 150 people, and 4 faculty get a plaque. And that's now been 3 years going, and it's gotten bigger each year. And it makes people aware in the faculty that, you know, you do speak to many audiences. Yes, write your deep papers for your scientific colleagues, but reflect on it and see what its societal impact is or what its business impact is, and write about it, you know, language, or do a video that makes it interpretable. So that's become a little bit more of a theme. Okay, so this is where I came when writing the book, maybe 2-3 years ago. And the book's now out in paperback, and it's, you know, gotten good attention, and I really appreciate the reception it's gotten here. It's been just a great pleasure to see that. So in the book, I try to tell the story with case studies. I mean, there's evidence here and there where I found it. And the case study I want to do briefly is my dear colleague, Rita Colwell, a superstar. May you all be so fortunate to have as great work as she's done. She's a bacteriologist, microbiologist. She was not only president of the American Microbiological Society, but also the head of the National Science Foundation for 6 years. She's wearing her National Medal of Science, given to her by Barack Obama a number of years ago. And among her great works was this one. This is a gem. This is a beautiful story. And Rita's a real hero. So she worked with a dozen colleagues in Bangladesh. She used satellite imagery and other kind of high-tech things to understand where cholera outbreaks occur in Bangladesh. And of course, they follow the monsoon storms when the waters flood and sewage gets into the water. And the cholera bacteria replicate in the warm waters, and people drink it and die. Okay? Now, question that Rita asked was, how can I stop this? Well, you may say, well, just boil the water. It's a flood. There's no trees left. There's nothing to boil with, okay? And so she tried to see the way, and the secret is here, the word simple. Simple filtration. It's a wonderful, wonderful idea. If you drink some water which has cholera bacteria in it, you may get sick. But what will really get you sick is if you swallow these little copepods. They're 1 or 2 millimeters long, and about 10,000 bacteria collect on their surface, which was the bit of science that Rita knew from her microbiology days, okay? And she thought, well, if I could stop these copepods, maybe I could reduce cholera. And her wonderfully simple solution is right over here. Take your cotton saris, put it over your jugs, and pour the water through them. And you will actually see the copepods collecting on these cotton saris. The free-floating cholera bacteria will flow through, but that may not kill you, as you know. And stopping this, and stopping them is noticeable, and then the water is noticeably cleaner as well. It's still a little murky, but it's better. So she went out with her team, and they went to 19 villages. They trained, especially women, make 8 layers of your sari, pour the water through, and then use that. And the problem was that it wasn't just use it once, but you have to do this every time, all the time. So that took a little more communication, and explaining the theory, the germ theory of disease, and how it worked was, a bit of a challenge. And they ran this for 3 months, and they worked with the hospitals to collect the statistics on cholera deaths, and they found no significant differences. But they were in design thinking mode, and they went back, and they said, okay, how can we improve our teaching methods? How can we make sure we reach everybody in the village? How can we make sure they do this all the time? How do we get better statistics from the hospitals? How do we broaden the catchment? And they did this for 65 villages with 133,000 people. And they get it. 48% reduction in cholera deaths, okay? Or cholera cases here per 1,000. That's pretty remarkable. Few of us will have, will be part of a project that produces that level of, better health. So she's been celebrated all over the world. The Japan Prize. Just 2 weeks ago, she got the French Légion d'honneur. The ambassador in Washington gave her this medal. All around the world. She has 61 honorary doctorates. I'm working up to Rita. Rita is just amazing and just a wonderful inspiration. So the book has 14 case studies, maybe not all as dramatic as this one, but it hopefully will give you confidence that this idea works. But here's the kicker now. This is what I wanted to, I just was getting this together. Where are we in time? Okay, we're good. So I have been challenged further that, is this idea really work? And I've tried to see about how I could collect evidence. And I began to talk about this in various places. And Brad Fenwick, who's vice president of Elsevier Corporation, which runs the Scopus database of all publications, he said, you're onto something. I think we can help you. We'll work together. So here's the pile of papers, 70 million papers. And as you may know, 44% of papers get 0 citations. 32% get 1 to 9 citations. And then the remaining, what is that, 76, 24% are the more frequently cited ones, all the way up to the top 10. There are 3 papers that get more than 100,000 citations, okay? Those are the rare beasts, okay? And that's kind of what the stack looks like for research, okay? And I began to dive into this stack with the help of the Elsevier people, and here's what I found. For the University of Maryland, I'm working to build a case at Maryland. So remember, this is sort of early data, and I haven't published this yet, but people seem to, when I mention it, people, and I just added this in the last hour. If you're a University of Maryland professor and you write a paper on your own, you'll get, on average, 3.0 citations, okay? If you work with others at your university, you'll get, on average, 6.1 citations. If you work with others in the United States, you get 9.2. If you have international collaborations, 13.9. But here's the kicker. Here's the big news. If you work with corporate, which means business or government, so World Bank is a corporate in this data analysis, you get 20.3. I thought that was pretty startling. I thought that was really pretty startling. And I'm still struggling with this. I presented this to 8 colleagues at the University of Maryland. 6 of them thought this was great, and they could use it to convince their colleagues and students. 2 of them still didn't quite buy it, so that's the kind of resistance. Not everyone thinks, and there's lots of reasons to question this, okay? There's lots of reasons to question this. And so I'm still in the process of digging deeper. Now, my collaborator at Elsevier is a young guy named Ashek Rahman, and he was showing this data, which is 4 universities, University of Sheffield, Illinois, Minnesota, and Copenhagen, and this is, again, the same profile of national collaborators, international and corporate. In every case, you get an increase, some more than others. And so I began to do more of that, and I've done about 20 universities. Here are 4 that I picked that show this case where there was at least a doubling of advantage for going with corporate co-authors. So Michigan, Carolina, Yale had especially surprising, I don't know why yet, and Harvard also. Not every university has this profile. Some have weaker ones, but in general the effect is robust, but not quite as strong as the ones I'm showing here or at Maryland. So I'm still trying to probe this, and I've begun drilling down to talk to my colleagues to find out how they work. So I use the Scopus database to find within computer science at the University of Maryland which of my colleagues had the most papers with a business co-author in the last 5 years. And one of them startled me by having 22 papers with business co-authors in the last 5 years. And this guy is what I thought of a super theoretician, algorithms guy, game theory. And I just was totally surprised, and I wrote to him and I said, you know, Mohammed, is this really you? I mean, are these your papers? And he said, yeah, I always work with business because they have good problems. I was, you know, unprompted. And he said, I send my students to do internships. I invite the corporate partners to come and speak here. And we have a rich and continuing relationship. That was pretty good. The next person on the list had 12. And he's a computer vision guy. And he said just about the same thing. Yes, I try to work with business. He had a few more things to it. He sends his students for internships. He brings speakers in. He also noted another phenomena, which is that when his students graduate and go to work in business, he keeps in close touch with them, and they often continue writing papers together. He had one other feature, which is he liked government-funded projects that supported university working with business. So in his case, it was DARPA, the Defense Advanced Research Agency, Projects Agency, and so that was yet another model. So we're beginning to explore this. My colleague in the College of Arts and Humanities, Linda Alduri, and she's approached her faculty and get more or less, there's not quite as many, but they're more or less the same picture, that they keep themselves open. If a corporate question comes in, they're willing to take the time and spend the time with them and talk to them. They're willing to go and visit or invite those corporate partners in to work with them. So I'm just at the start, and I'm just early on presenting this. This is not published, so you just have to take this from here, but that's where I'm going. So that's the end of the story here. That's what the book is about, but the movement now towards trying to take it from my book to bring together other people, has resulted in the formation of a group which has given itself the name HIBAR, Highly Integrative Basic and Responsive Research. And this is their tagline, engaging theory with practice for transformative solutions. The goal is the twin win, to combine academic research methods and practical application, engage the efforts of academics and real-world experts. So that's what we're doing. We have the support of the Association for Public and Land-Grant Universities. Our webpage is hosted there. And the National Academy of Sciences have done 2 workshops for there. They have something called Government University Industry Research Roundtable. And so you can watch the videos from that presentation, but it's pretty much what I've given you here today, so I think you'll get the idea. And maybe just, let me come to closure here. This group, last meeting was in Vancouver at University of British Columbia on November 1st, and so we want to explain the value, facilitate success, influence grant allocation. Many people think that the place we have to go to is the funding agencies, which is one place, but not the only. Promotion and tenure, changing the policies of promotion and tenure to value that. 45 North American universities already have added patents to be on an equal basis as papers, and that's one indicator. But University of Southern California, for example, has changed its tenure rules to give extra value for those who are good collaborators. And they've stipulated the ways they want the collaboration documented. So increasingly, journals also are requiring that authors indicate who did what, who did the statistics and data analysis, who captured the data, who did the study, all the different parts of it. So I think research papers will become more like Hollywood movies with a list of credits at the end that says who did what. And that will develop. So you can see our website is aplu.org/HIBAR, and you can send us email and join this group. The next meeting will probably be at UC San Diego in early 2018, and we're looking to build momentum. In Australia, there might be similar movements. I've been in close touch by Mark Western at University of Queensland. He runs the Social Science Institute there, and he's very much onto this. He's really and so there may be opportunity with the Australian Research Council to form alliances. And, Mark Western, I just really like, I've never met him, but I like his style, and there may be opportunities there. I think you should develop your own approach to this, not necessarily follow this one here. And I think that's the end of the story. Twin win for your work, building a better world. Thank you for your time and attention. I think that's it. Okay. Good. All right. I'm here for questions and comments or challenges. Yes, thank you. Dana.
You were talking about the 3 disciplines, science, engineering, and design. Would you advocate for having a team of individual specialists, or would you advocate for each person on a team having skills?
Yeah, I think that's an interesting question. I don't have a clean answer. Is it possible for one person to have all those skills? Maybe. I mean, there may be some people who can do it all. They know the application domain, they have the research methods, they know these different skills, and they do it. But I kind of doubt it. I would say having everybody on the team familiar and sympathetic, but some people being especially strong. And part of that will be to support the right kind of publication. If you're going to write a paper about this stuff, you want to make sure you cite all the right people in the areas that you're drawing from. And so I think that's important. I think it's kind of interesting. My reading of Rita Colwell's key paper on this, to me, is all about design thinking for public health. But she never phrased it that way. When I describe it to her, she says, oh yeah, we did that, we did that. We just didn't write about it in the paper because we didn't think We thought that was obvious, but it wasn't obvious. They made good choices about how to do the teaching, and they made improvements, but they're not described there. And I think had they had a design thinking public health person, they would have had a better paper, which would have been easier for others to replicate their results in other medical fields. So yes, I would say it's helpful to have a team. And teams are very good for a lot of reasons. Teams are a problem. I mean, let's face it, teams often fail. It's a problem. It's hard work working in a team, and failure is maybe, is a common thing. But if you develop your skills, and you try this a few times, and you learn how to do it, teams are very strong. When they succeed exceptionally well. And that's another lesson, that the teamwork brings you not just more people to work on it, but the different perspectives that you're suggesting is one. And then there are real inherent processes to teams, like simply clarifying your goals and what you want to do and getting consensus about it. It's pretty nice. I have a happy collaboration for 30 years with Catherine Plaisant, okay? She's a research scientist, and we're very different personalities, and our work together is not quiet. It's often contentious, and the students just sort of watch us, as we sort of battle each other, but it's always respectful. And when Catherine differs with me, I listen because I know she's got a reason for it. So I would say those different personalities. Yeah, George, I think.
So when you were talking, I was thinking of Katie Gorner's work, where she, about 10 years ago, looked at distance and its impact on citation, that when people apparently had more publications, they cited a geographical distance closer to them, in effect their world shrank. But actually I was then thinking, in a sort of roundabout way, is distance actually important in this relationship between the business, for example, or the other corporates, and the other parts of the team? So those almost contradict each other, but do you think distance is a factor here?
Just to clarify, Kati Borner's a wonderful researcher at Indiana University. On my way here, I was at Irvine, California for a symposium she ran called Modeling and Visualizing Scientific and Technological Processes, and I gave a version of this talk there. So I'm quite familiar with her efforts, and it's quite interesting. The paper you described, I don't remember the details, but there's a long history of showing that distance matters. And that collaborations within a building, if you're on the same floor, you're more likely to work with people than if you're on a different floor. And the difficulties being further away in a different building, in a different city, in a different country, go up. However, Brad Fenwick, the vice president at Elsevier, makes the point that people seek out international collaborations because people have special skills, equipment, astronomical instruments or physics synchrotrons or other things. And so there's good reasons to find these other partners who share your interests. I think what's also happened is that the barriers to collaboration at distance are going down. It's still true that distance matters, but the barriers are going down. So I think those who develop the skills for working international collaborations that's an important aspect. But it's an interesting question about whether the distance function for collaborations has declined over time. Don't know. I guess Sarah Kiesler, I think, and Cummings, what's his name? Her student, Jonathan Cummings, has studied this issue about collaboration, whether on your own campus or further away. It's generally harder to collaborate further away, but the reasons for doing it may be high. And there's one other, factor there, that collaborating with a prominent person in your field has a big advantage for you. So it's worth it if you collaborate with a prominent leader, even if they're far away. Does that help a little? Want to come back on that? Does that sound good?
Let's also think about the distance to the business or the corporation.
Yeah.
I was wondering if, say, if you're in California, that there are certain geographical constraints there, whereas, say, if you're in Sheffield, there may be a bit.
Absolutely. Tom Allen, who's a wonderful researcher at MIT, now retired, but Tom had studied the difference in the pharmaceutical industry in downtown Boston, Harvard, MIT, and the Kendall Square area, versus the companies who are out just 20 miles away on Route 128, if you know, outside Boston. And there was a significant difference, that the closeness and the facilitating access had a very powerful effect. So one of the things you can do in this campus, and so I'm trying to do at Maryland, it's a bit of a struggle, lower the barriers for people in the industry or government to come to campus. Arrange for transportation, parking, signage, and seek them out and have them, you know, I was asking Frank, I mean, how many of you here are from off campus? Let's try that. Well, we got a few. Oh, okay. That's good. Yeah, I think that you want to make the porous boundaries with people in industry and government because that enriches everybody. And the university is then seen as a driver of innovation. And industry mainly wants to hire our students, but they want the ideas and access to that. So there's a set of things that Maryland's quite challenged because the transportation is not good for where we are, and getting people to come is, you know, is an effort. So working on that, you may have a better advantage. You're quite downtown here, and so you just want to make it easy. You want to build email lists of people. Get the emails of all these people here, and you want to build your list of those connections and let the people in the region know you want them here. And then make special events. I mean, this talk is one, but I was describing last night that, you know, we run a symposium for our lab, and it's been going on almost 35 years, and we charge $200 for business attendees and $100 for faculty to attend, and we get 200 people coming, and we lower rates for students, of course, but you know, making an event which brings regional players on a certain topic here so they get to see each other. You're building the community in those ways. Those are virtuous things that universities do that companies would have a harder time doing, but you become the leader for a certain technology. I mean, you may be doing those things already. Yeah. Other questions? Oh, all kinds of hands. Yeah.
Comment on the last question and a question on my own, if I may. I recall seeing a paper recently, a few years ago, where they tracked the citation rate as a function of the first and the distance between the first and the last author.
Geographic distance?
Geographic
Yeah.
distance. And there was a statistically significant difference if they were in the same building, in the same city,
Yeah.
or in different cities.
Yeah, it's harder to collaborate further away.
With
Yeah.
fewer citations there.
Yeah.
I don't recall your paper.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
My question is about your finding, your observation that the citations increase with corporate co-authors.
Yep.
So I wonder why. Is it because they have done better research? Is it because they disseminated the results differently? Is it because they've worked on different problems? What's the
Yeah, we've begun to dig through that. I guess I did the slides in this deck, but there's a few conjectures there. I suggested already one is that the people in business or government who are facing a real problem have something that's valuable to you as a researcher. If you can crack their problem, you have an instant audience that would put it to work to refine it, to validate it, to generalize it. And so it's a real opportunity for a researcher. If you've got an idea and you've got a good partner, there are lots of bad corporate partners too, let's face it, you know, but people who are savvy and ready to work with universities and, you know, and are willing to make the arrangements and work with you in a big way, that seems positive. Then, again, in general, in teamwork, expressing the differences of opinions and resolving them, forming a consensus plan is another thing. You also got a few of the other key things. The dissemination path is if they talk about it in their professional business environments and you talk about it in your academic environments, you get other feedback and outreach, and you may create more interest, more people who want to put this to work. So there's a variety of those things. Having more authors, of course, does help, but even removing self-citations in these analyses, which account for about 10 or 15%, you still get the effects being very strong. So my conjecture is that business people have good problems, and I would say they have amazing resources. And remember, in our developing the tool called Spotfire, we had a small research group. We did pretty well, but once it went to become a company and they had 200 people working, I could never hire 200 people to build out this, this tool and test it and refine it. So it's a different kind of work. Corporate development is different from academic development, but I thought that was a very good thing. So there's resources, there's motivation, clear payoff, more rapid feedback, because business has got to move along. Academics sometimes are a little slow in getting, some of them, not all, but some are slow in working it, whereas in business there's a much more of a pressure. Does that kind of sound reasonable? Okay, yeah.
Is there a recommended proportion of applied to basic?
Oh dear. Would you believe me if I gave you an answer to that one? No, I don't think so. I would say sometimes, there comes a clean, crisply described problem, and that's all I need, and I can go to work, and then I don't need that kind of collaboration. I would say my data is also flawed because looking for corporate co-authors severely underestimates the collaborations. There are many times where we and others work with people in business or government or get an idea, but then they don't have them as co-authors. So I would say, there's more going on than we realize. I don't know how to collect the data on those things. We're trying different strategies and looking in different sources of data, patent data. In the U.S., we have something called Small Business Innovation Research Awards, and those go to small companies, so there's a little more of a history. We also have history of 33,000 medical device development trajectories. So we're looking at those kind of things. But I don't think there's one answer to that. I think it's true. Yeah, thank you.
So in HCI, and I'm sure they can find examples in other fields as well, we have kind of these two types of research, one coming bottom-up from the problem, driven by method, for example, or perhaps we might have a top-down kind of research where you start with some kind of technology and you build this kind of more engineering-driven kind of research. So I can see how this ABC model works really well if you are doing this kind of bottom-up research. And if you're in interaction design, you can design think a way out of any kind of problem. That's great. But what about if your research is usually top-down and you're an expert on some kind of technology and it's almost like you already have the solution and you might be looking for a problem, but the problem sometimes is not quite clear.
I'm not sure I'd use the word top-down or bottom-up. I'd say others have described that as technology-driven, where you've got a technology or a new technology, you've got some faster something or better something, and you're now looking for a place to apply it. And those are ways to make progress. Yeah. And the other is work from a problem and then find out what technology you need. And Galileo polished his own lenses and developed optics and so on. There's all kinds of stories about how that happens. So I think you can get somewhere with both of them. But I think if you do both, if you do a technology, if you have a technology and you're looking for people with real problems, that probably gives strength. And I should say, there's not one way to do this. I mean, it's fine for the lone tinkerer and theorist to work on their own. But, there's this model I'm suggesting as a voluntary effort. You don't have to go here. I do think if you're spending my tax dollars, I do want you to have a little more thought that says, make the case that if you're going to be more theoretical, you are thinking about some way in which this might eventually lead to an application. So there we get to the policy issues that are quite contentious. I might say within the National Science Foundation, I've spoken there, and I got warm reception. And there are examples. That my favorite is a program called Algorithms in the Field. This is, theory, computer science, AITF. If you search on AITF, you'll find it. And The AITF program surprised me happily by saying, we encourage submissions from theoretical computer scientists working on algorithms, working with domain experts with a real problem. That was pretty good. And there are 6 NSF programs that I think have the spirit that I'm looking for, and I'm trying to encourage more of that language and wording. The use of the word design, sort of a new thing. It appears in the data science innovation hubs. It appears in secure and applied and assured, secure, SATC, secure and assured, and secure and trusted computing. And the word design appears 42 times, which is rare, you know, in NSF things. So look for those things. Changing the language you use is also part of this process. Shifting what you say in the strategic plans and immersing yourself in this fresh language will, I think, lead to some productive changes also. But, you know, your issue, I think you can do technology push if you have something that you want to go forward. I don't know how much time you want to...
Maybe.
I'm sorry.
Can I ask one?
Yeah.
We've got many people from industry here.
Yeah.
And it seems your messages are very strong for universities, but I think there are some messages there for industry as well. And one of the win, when you talk about win in terms of theory and solution, but there's also potentially a win for industry.
Absolutely. Sure, sure. And there are some things the industry has to do in changing, and I think it's happening, but still more problematic. Just let me remind you to take a look at a website from the University Industry Demonstration Program, uidp.org, uidp.org. And this is a spin-off of the National Academy of Sciences Government University Industry Research Roundtable. Get all those names out there. So UIDP has members that are industry, big companies in the U.S. and universities, and it seeks to bring them together for doing internships, for hiring students, for doing joint research. They have templates for contracts for how to work together. And the shift that I've seen, I mean, there are times in the past where the industry people who came and wanted to work with us made such strong demands that we just said, no, we can't do that. And the issues tend to revolve around who owns the data, who owns the intellectual property of the results, and who controls the research and the publications. So the terms that we have moved to are ones that clarify the university's role as the developer of the technology, the owner of the intellectual property. And we work with industry, so Oracle and Adobe particularly have supported us in recent years, and they come as unrestricted gifts, not contracts. This, in the past, was less familiar, but the university favors this, and I'm not sure what your rules are here, but University of Maryland puts on 52% overhead for contracts with companies. But if the company gives an unrestricted gift, zero. So I get the full $100,000 to spend on my students. And that's a big advantage to industry. I don't know if you can do that or do those things here, but those kind of arrangements are favorable for everybody, I think, because it gives me money to support students and put them to work. The companies then have to accept the idea that they don't own what they do. In fact, Oracle is in the process of licensing the work that we developed under their support and other support as well. It's been a long-term effort. So that's a bit of a mind change on some of the companies. The advantage they have are they get to steer the direction of our work. They get to hear about it 6 or 12 months before papers get published. They get to comment on the papers before they're submitted. So we give them 2 weeks before the deadline, and we let them read the paper. And if they want us to change things for good reason, we'll change it. But if we decide, no, we do want to have all that in there, we publish, we have the right to publish it. So those are the terms. That's the meaning of an unrestricted gift. Those are the principles of how we work, and we think those advantage. Yeah. Yeah.
How do you handle patents?
How do we handle patents? In very different ways. Sometimes they get in the way, and sometimes we go after them. If it's well enough defined and narrow and clear, we'll pursue a patent, like that one I showed about photo tagging. That was a very specific thing, and that one worked out well. Other times we filed for patents and didn't get them. Other times we thought, we don't want to go for a patent. For a variety of reasons, we want it open, and there's a strong movement of so-called open science, which doesn't favor patents. I can see all these different ways of working, so I find an individual basis. Do you have some recommendation or some?
Just doing work with corporates when they come off.
Yeah.
They become a problem with academic stuff.
Yeah, I would say this speaks to the question from the back before about how is university research different from industry. So I would say the things we do think are broader in general. So the tree maps, I never patent. I wasn't sure at the time there was a patentable idea. I thought of it as a mathematical algorithm. I think I could have patented, but I think it was good that I didn't. Because at the time there were two other competing ideas from Xerox PARC, which was a strong force at the time, Palo Alto Research Center, and they heavily patented the two alternative ideas. They heavily funded them. They promoted startups, and poor me, I was this little academic guy with this idea, but their ideas have died out. They're gone. They're not in Wikipedia, and tree maps have flourished. There are hundreds of tree map patents now. There are hundreds of applications. It's because it got validated, checked, improved, advanced, refined, whereas the patenting had locked down innovation too early in that process. So I would like to think that academic research is somewhat more novel and innovative, and some people use the phrase pre-competitive, but it's kind of opens up a fresh possibility, and then companies will come in and add their refinements as patents that they then protect and own. So that's another. But again, I'm open to these different stories. I can see, and I know of colleagues and friends where patents were helpful for them to protect. Yeah. Thank you. I appreciate your questions and your interest. I'll be here and glad to talk with you for a while. And thank you, Frank and Ivan. Appreciate it. Thank you.